Lady Diana Spencer leaves on her journey to marry Charles, Prince of Wales. His bride was just 21 years old. It was 1981. Charles, 13 years older than Diana, had dithered over his choice of bride for many years. They had first met 5 years ago when she was only 16. In the event, more than 700 million people watched the wedding. The fairy tale princess had taken the world by storm. For Diana, there was no doubt why she was marrying Prince Charles.
Diana was in love with Prince Charles, and she was in love with the idea of being in love. She's a romantic. She was just in love with the whole idea, and what more romantic thought for a young teenage girl than to marry a prince.
Diana's ancestral home is Althorp in Northamptonshire. She's a daughter of one of Britain's oldest and noblest families. Diana's father was an equerry to King George VI. Before inheriting the title Earl Spencer, the family lived on the royal estate at Sandringham, where Diana was brought up with her two sisters and younger brother Charles. When she was only 7, her parents separated, and after an acrimonious divorce, Diana was left in the care of her father.
Diana was a very young child. Her older sisters were away at boarding school. Charles was still in the nursery because he was younger still. And she very much became her father's great companion and indeed hostess. I mean, when he gave shooting parties, she used to help him organise the shooting lunches and so on, and really helped him run the house and run the family, and was extremely close to her father. And he absolutely adored her.
When Diana was 17, her father remarried, creating considerable problems for his youngest daughter.
When he married Rain Spencer, I think she felt a great sense of isolation and loneliness in that she never got on with her stepmother. Indeed, all the children resented the fact that they hadn't been allowed to see their father when he was desperately ill with a stroke. And a friend who was at Lord Spencer's wedding to Rain recalls driving away, seeing Diana standing completely alone, looking very miserable, leaning against a saddle stone. She'd lost her mother, now she'd lost her father.
The traumas of home life were compensated for at boarding school. Not particularly academic, Diana later recalled her time spent away from home.
My years at Westheath were certainly very happy ones indeed. I made many friends who I often see, and in spite of what Miss Rudge and my other teachers may have thought at the time, I did actually learn something. Though you would never have known by my O-level results.
For the young Diana, marriage and babies were an aristocratic girl's career. After Westheath, her future took a predictable turn, working as an unqualified nursery school teacher.
I wanted to teach children, and they said, why not come along? So I first started off doing afternoons, and then I took over the mornings and did whole days. But I only worked 3 days a week at kindergarten, and the other 2 I looked after American baby boy.
In November 1980, Diana's name was linked to Prince Charles. The press soon picked up the scent. Her caution in front of the cameras was a skill she swiftly acquired when quizzed about her relationship with Charles.
Can you say if you're likely to make an announcement soon?
Lady Diana. Lady Diana.
We thought it was going to be an announcement on his 32nd birthday, but there wasn't, and he told reporters yesterday that it may be coming soon. Have you any comment to make about that?
Lady Diana.
No comment all round. Did you have a good weekend though? It's work there, okay?
An official announcement soon followed, and TV cameras were allowed, momentarily, to lift the veil of secrecy.
Can you take us back to when you first met?
Yes, certainly can. It was 1977. Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
Slightly previous to that, but I know.
And what did you think then? What was your instant impression, both of you? What did you think about Lady Diana?
Well, I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was. And, I mean, great fun. And bouncy and full of life and everything. And I don't know what you thought of me.
Pretty amazing.
Nobody worried about the 13-year age difference. So openly in love, the couple brought joy to a nation undergoing hard times. Shy Di was launched on the world. Her first public appearance caused a few raised eyebrows at a reception in London's Goldsmiths Hall.
She went to the Emanuels and chose a very daring dress, which was very low-cut, strapless. Rather a ball gown than an ordinary dress suitable for a concert. She was a very voluptuous girl in those days. This was long before the bulimia set in. And of course, when Prince Charles stepped out of his car with Diana behind him, he looked at the photographers and said, "You won't believe what's coming next." And they were all thrilled when they saw her because she made sensational pictures. And of course, she had to bend very low to get out of the car. And I know that there was a lot of questions asked in newsrooms and television studios later that evening about whether the pictures were fit for broadcast, because the dress was so low cut that a lot of people thought that we were going to see a bit too much of the next Princess of Wales. It was a very, very glamorous eyeful of a gorgeous girl.
Wedding worries were beginning to tell. At a polo match, Diana left the field in tears. Later, revelations claimed that Diana was having serious doubts about the marriage. Her unhappiness was caused by Charles's continuing friendship with an old girlfriend, Camilla Parker Bowles.
Charles was in love with Camilla years before he met Diana. That love then turned into a deep and close friendship. He didn't give up that friendship. It was at Camilla's house that he did most of his courting of Diana. Camilla was very much involved in his relationship with Diana in the early days. So there's no doubt that certainly he was seeing her during that period.
After the engagement announcement, Charles left on an official 5-week tour of Australia. Reports later suggested that he'd been with Camilla prior to his departure, reducing Diana to tears when she saw him off at the airport.
Well, you see, there was a great problem at the time because the Prince of Wales had had various girlfriends who, however nice they were deemed to be rather unsuitable and that they'd had previous boyfriends and so on. And to my mind, the two grannies got together, Lady Fermoy and the Queen Mother who doted on Charles, and they thought, here is the most wonderful, sweet girl who comes from the right sort of background and she would be ideal. I think the trouble was that they really had absolutely nothing in common. And he, having been the Prince of Wales, the dominant party and all the rest of it, found himself caught up with and then gradually overtaken by this complete superstar.
The wedding was the biggest media event the world had ever seen. Unbeknown, Diana's anxiety extended to her father's state of health.
I think it was a terrible ordeal for Diana, and I think it was a terrible ordeal for Lord Spencer as well, but he had a very, very bad stroke from which it was thought he wouldn't recover. She virtually had to carry him up the aisle. And to add to all her problems, this magnificent wedding dress, designed by the Emanuels, had got fantastically crushed in the carriage, which was a problem that nobody had anticipated. And, I mean, everybody was rushing round in panic because this dress was completely crumpled like a piece of tissue paper. It looked as if it had never been ironed. And that must have been really, well, horrid for her in a way on this very, very special day with all these other pressures. But I think she overcame it.
Diana made a radiant and confident figure in her stunning wedding gown. She endeared herself to the world when she modelled her husband's names as she took her vows.
I, Diana Frances.
I, Diana Frances.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
To have and to hold.
To have and to hold.
From this day forward.
From this day forward.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For richer, for poorer.
For richer, for poorer.
In sickness and in health.
In sickness and in health.
To love and to cherish.
To love and to cherish.
Till death us do part.
Till death us do part.
Diana and Charles left for their honeymoon. Britain spent the day celebrating. First stop Gibraltar, in a plane with Prince Charles at the controls, en route for a trip around the Mediterranean aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia. But the strain of the past few months had taken a toll on Diana. The run-up to the wedding had been a traumatic experience for the new Princess of Wales. Observers noticed how thin and tired she looked.
When she arrived at the airport at Gibraltar, she was so sort of pale and she was so thin and she looked so fragile and nervous. She was like a bag of nerves, you know, as if the whole of the last few days she was really worn down with it. And all the time she was searching around, sort of following Charles in his footsteps, and she wasn't at all confident about it.
To be alone as ever they would be, that was the plan. But Charles's association with Camilla extended to the honeymoon. Later, reports suggested that he telephoned her from the royal yacht. Future trouble was still a long way off as the couple returned to Balmoral with loving smiles and shining eyes. The fairy tale continued.
And as they walked down through the heather, they were hand in hand, they were giggling, and there was a lot of body language amongst the two of them. And he kept kissing her hand, and she kept going all pink and giggly, and it was really very natural. It wasn't at all staged. At that stage, it was a very spontaneous, natural sort of thing between the two of them. And it was a very pretty scene as they came down. And then they disappeared off into the, well, not the sunset, but the heather, hand in hand, and it was a romantic shot as they disappeared.
The romantic scenes from Balmoral soon gave way to concern about Diana's health. Behind the smiles, there were other muttered concerns.
Diana was very unstable emotionally, as we now know in hindsight, when she married Prince Charles. And I think Prince Charles really, really wanted to play Professor Higgins, and he really wanted to help her. I mean, on their honeymoon, she was deeply distraught, very unhappy, so much so, he actually got a psychiatrist to go up to Balmoral. This is you know, like 4 weeks into their honeymoon. Now, that's not the action of someone that doesn't care. It's someone that's desperately thinking, you know, I've got to help this girl.
Members of her mother's family have told me that her own mother was a very, very highly strung woman. Indeed, somebody once described her as a hysteric. Now, Diana is certainly not that. She's got the hard-headedness of the Spencers, but she's undoubtedly extremely nervy. And the sort of pressures that were put upon her, and although Prince Charles did his best to support her, he wasn't the sort of cuddly daddy that she missed, and I think she missed that sort of reassurance, and therefore I think that she was unhappy and lonely and depressed, and she was terribly isolated in her ivory tower.
Diana's problems were temporarily overcome with the euphoria of motherhood. Within a year of marriage, Prince William was born. When a month-long official foreign tour was planned, Diana insisted that the baby William accompany them to Australia and New Zealand. Public interest in the young couple was intense.
Does Prince William have a favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. but he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise.
It's a plastic whale which throws things out the top.
You've got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
Thank you. Jamie, I hope that answers your question.
Charles was pleased to show off his dancing prowess before his Australian hosts. Exhausted by the royal itinerary and the relentless heat, Diana and Charles were mobbed by crowds wherever they appeared.
There were crowds everywhere who wanted to shake hands with her. And in one city, Brisbane in Queensland, the crowds closed in on her. They were almost 1 million people turned out to see her. And it was just so frightening. She had to retire to the town hall and have a glass of water, and she was at a state of collapse, I think. It was very hot. Too many people were crowding into a very small street, and the police were afraid that there'd be a major incident.
It must have been a terrifying experience for somebody who was so unused to such things. I mean, it was quite frightening enough for the rest of us who'd done it many times before.
Diana claimed that her first foreign trip had been a baptism of fire. The visit had been a remarkable success. Charles was proud of his new wife.
Ladies and gentlemen, the last time I was here was 2 years ago, in 1981, shortly before we were married. And at that time, everybody was saying, good luck, and I hope everything goes well, and how lucky you are to be engaged to such a lovely lady. And my goodness, I was lucky enough to marry her. And we had many, many messages. It's amazing what ladies do when your back's turned.
I do think he was very proud of her in the early days. And I think that really noticed in Australia in '83. I mean, the way he sort of put his arm around her and pushed her forward to meet people, and he did look very proud of her. And he used to catch a glimpse now and again when they were sitting on a podium, and he would turn around and look at her, and there would be just a little sort of exchange between the two, and I think he was very proud of her.
But things began to turn sour. On an official visit to Canada later in the year, Diana was quoted as saying, "One minute I was a nobody, the next minute I was the Princess of Wales, mother, media toy, member of this family. It was just too much for one person to handle." Charles seemed incapable of comprehending the turmoil in Diana's life. She was suffering from the eating disorder bulimia nervosa and existing on chocolate bars to keep her going.
I think everybody noticed that she was Belson-like. I mean, she was pathetically thin. And, I mean, I was always quite close to the royal party at state banquets and so on. And you just see her pushing her food around her plate. I mean, I never, ever saw her eat anything. And at that time, we thought that she was just trying very hard to sort of please her hosts, that it was nerves, really, that was preventing her from eating properly. But, I mean, everybody was aware that she was far too thin. There were anxieties about her.
At one point, Diana fainted and had to be helped away. Charles is reported to have been unsympathetic, and after recovering her composure, they left quickly.
Some of the people very close to her then told me later that they thought that she staged that faint because she was extremely hot, tired, and very bored with staggering round one boring exhibition after another with her husband. And as a way of escape, she just collapsed very neatly out of the view of the television and the still cameraman. So it was a very well-timed collapse.
Back on form, Diana gave the Canadian people an amusing glimpse of royal life on a collision course with Charles. 6 months pregnant with her second child, Diana seemed the perfect example of wifehood and motherhood, hardly a hint of personal unhappiness. Later reports claimed that Charles was dismissive about the birth of Prince Harry, disappointed that their second child wasn't a girl and looking too much like a Spencer with a lot of red hair. Pictures of them together captured the fulfillment of married love. There were signs, though, that Charles was once again seeing Camilla Parker Bowles. Late-night telephone calls, unexplained absences. Ironically, their marriage appeared otherwise to be happy. On holiday in Spain with King Juan Carlos and his family, Diana and Charles appeared relaxed away from the spotlight and the pressures of royal duty. This was Diana's kind of holiday, and she much admired the King of Spain's attitude towards his royal duties.
Juan Carlos is quite informal, really, compared to our monarchy. When he buzzes around on a motorbike and journalists have drinks with him in bars, he sort of buys them a beer. It's very different, and I think Diana liked this. I mean, Charles may have found that informality a little difficult to deal with, but it was quite relaxing for Diana and the boys to be in that kind of atmosphere.
Diana's greatest test was the royal couple's first visit to the United States. Public interest was massive, and the trip included being guests of honor at a glittering White House ball. For Washington, it was the social event of the decade. The cream of American arts and public life turned out to meet Diana, who was welcomed by President Reagan.
Your Royal Highnesses, Sir Oliver and Lady Wright, and Ambassador and Mrs. Price, and ladies and gentlemen, Nancy and I are deeply honored to welcome the Prince and Princess of Wales to the White House. Permit me to add our congratulations.
The president was so taken with Diana's presence that he almost forgot her name.
And express also our great happiness that we have been able to have this affair with Princess Diane here on her first trip to the United States, that we should be able to share in that first trip.
Later, Diana danced with John Travolta, leaving her husband to explain what the experience had been like.
Well, I'm not a glove puppet, so I can't answer for that, I'm afraid. But I think you enjoyed it, didn't you, Ronnie? Be an idiot if she didn't enjoy dancing with John Travolta, wouldn't she?
And why were the press so fascinated by their every move?
It's nothing to do with me. It's my wife here.
During a visit to the Treasure Houses of Britain exhibition, Charles's disapproving tone went unnoticed by their American hosts, although they did notice that Diana seemed distracted and unwell. She was exhausted, she hadn't eaten, and was distressed by her husband's uncaring attitude towards her bulimia nervosa.
I'm not sure that many people really understand bulimia, and I think that it is particularly difficult for the people who have to live with those people who suffer from it. I think Charles found it a very difficult thing. I mean, her moods were up and down. One minute she was pleased with life and optimistic and happy, and the next minute hurling things about the place. The problem is that if you live with somebody who day after day is like this, who's constantly eating and then disappearing to the loo to chuck up, I just know that it must be very difficult to be understanding and patient and reassuring and always there with the with the compassion that is needed day after day after day.
I'm told by psychiatrists that it's very difficult for husbands to understand when a woman's bulimic because they're simply repulsed by it. The smell, the mess, it's frightful. Nobody can understand why somebody would wish to do this to themselves. And so he was very turned off by it. He was physically turned off by it, and I think that was the main reason why they stopped sleeping together.
Bulimia has its roots in an unhappy childhood, self-doubt and uncertainty in adolescence. Years later, Diana was able to speak on behalf of fellow bulimia sufferers.
The illness they developed became their shameful friend. By focusing their energies on controlling their bodies, they had found a refuge from having to face the more painful issues at the center of their lives. A way of coping, albeit destructively and pointlessly, but a way of coping with a situation they were finding unbearable.
In 1986, Dai mania took Japan by the throat when the royal couple visited the country in May. Its teeming population had watched the royal wedding on television and was now in the grip of a quite extraordinary enthusiasm. But the Japanese were blissfully unaware of Diana's difficulties.
I think to the Japanese, she looked like the sort of European goddess of folklore, because she was beautifully tall, beautifully blonde, beautifully dressed. She was their absolute ideal European beauty. And the way she behaved and her gentleness and so on, I think would also have appealed to them a great deal. And she was an absolute wow. You know, the inscrutable Oriental cracked, and they absolutely adored her. And I remember going to Buddhist temples with her. And the monks were all sort of falling over themselves, taking photographs. I mean, anything less dignified, you know, chattering away. There was meant to be vows of silence. But even they couldn't resist saying, she's gorgeous.
Diana brought a movie star glamour to the role of Princess of Wales. Using clothes to express her personality and boost her self-confidence, Diana enjoyed dressing for the part.
She did two things in Japan. One, she wore a dress, a white silk dress with big red circles, and it looked just like the rising sun on the Japanese flag. And then the second thing she did later in the week is she wore a dress designed by a Japanese designer. And up until that time, we'd only seen her in British design clothes. So it was her way of complimenting them.
There's no doubt that Diana put British fashion on the map. I mean, certainly the designers who dressed her, Belleville Sassoon, Victor Edelstein, Catherine Walker, they were really made by her patronage, and people all around the world started buying their clothes. And of course the Emanuels who designed her wedding dress were instantly transformed into sensational designers.
Between them, on joint tours around the world, they created a climate of goodwill towards Britain, whose brighter and better future they seemed to represent. Diana was a role model, a heroine. In Venice and elsewhere, she was a superstar who became the most powerful image in a popular world culture. Like every other celebrity, she fed and lived on her public's emotions. She wore their affection like a suit of armor. She used it to defend herself against Charles's uncaring attitude towards her and to win the hearts of her adoring public. He was reduced to a second-class royal citizen.
Such was the adulation. I mean, it was clear to see that nobody was remotely interested in him. You know, I mean, he was just the bouquet carrier, you know. They'd walk down on a walkabout and, you know, they'd all sort of look over his shoulder while he was trying to talk to them, to try and see if she was going to cross over and come down their side. You know, they didn't want him at all, you know. And he'd say, hello, how are you? And they'd say, could you give this bouquet to Diana, please? You know, poor man. I mean, it was very humiliating for him, you know. And there were great boos when he came over to their side of the street because they wanted Diana, but she couldn't split herself in two. Indeed, she made this comment, you know. She said she was sorry to disappoint, but she couldn't be both sides of the road at the same time.
It was a magic but dangerous quality that set Diana apart from most other royal performers, but she was different from them in another way. Her vulnerability made her easy for the emotionally wounded to identify with, a quality which Charles didn't possess.
Diana was aware how much her husband resented her popularity and the fact that she upstaged him, and so she was doing her best to prevent the problem, but in the end she saw that it was useless and she just gave up.
Public adoration was actually the thing that kept Diana going. She lived for it. It was like a drug for her. She was overwhelmed by it when she first came to it, when she first became engaged to Charles. She initially found it very difficult to cope with, but once she'd got on top of it, she actually found that it was tremendous.
Her marriage made her a beauty and a star. Maybe it was because she was so young and naive that she took part in the fairy tale wedding that everybody hoped and believed would be a success. A framed picture of the prince hung in her dormitory at school. Her destiny was to marry Prince Charles, but not to stay in the Victorian era. Her proud father, Earl Spencer, recalled that one of her great strengths had been to cope with her public exposure.
She's very good-natured. It doesn't worry her. Publicity doesn't worry her. As you've seen from her way she's dealt with the press, she's taken it all in her stride. I think she'll always be like that. She's very practical, Diana, very down-to-earth, very practical, very good housewife. And incidentally, when she was a baby, she was a superb physical specimen. She'd won any baby prize there was going.
The Spencer family, as I've said, were one of the oldest families in Britain. They were all very distinguished. They all rose to the very top. While a lot of people were speculating was Lady Diana Spencer a suitable match for the Prince of Wales, he advanced the thought, was he a suitable match for her, given that, you know, the Windsor family haven't been in this country quite as long as the Spencers.
Long summer holidays in Scotland showed the royal family in a new light. Diana became more guarded and less confident in her dealings with them. In public, the couple put on a happy face as rumours about their private life grew gloomier. Images of happier, more promising days will live on in the nation's family album. On the darker side, she had very little in common with the royal family.
I think poor Princess of Wales had a very difficult time in that the Duke of Edinburgh and the Princess Royal don't tolerate people they consider fools. And they are very sort of hard-headed and down-to-earth and so on. And I think they considered her a little bit of a lightweight, a little bit of a featherhead. The Queen, I think, was absolutely thrilled with her because I think she fulfilled exactly what she wanted in that she was a nice girl, the public loved her, and she'd produced 2 sons and heirs for the Prince of Wales, and I'm sure the Queen felt that, you know, she would make him happy.
Charles preferred the solitude of the Scottish countryside and painting.
She's a very urban creature, although she was brought up in the country. She loves society, loves pavements and shops and restaurants and being on the end of a telephone or meeting her friends. So their life really was a million miles away from hers.
Diana and Charles were spending more and more time apart. As an unhappy royal wife of an unhappy royal husband, it was their decision to separate their lives and appear together only in public and on family occasions. The press got wind of their estrangement and in 1987 published stories questioning the myth that the Wales' marriage was a happy one. But the fabrication didn't stop there. Palace officials reassured the newspapers and the world that the stories were untrue. The family home at Highgrove in Gloucestershire was not surrounded by pressmen, nor was the nearby home of Charles's close friend Camilla Parker Bowles, to whom Charles fled when the pressure got too great.
I think if you've got a very unhappy relationship, you always find somebody else's shoulder to cry on. It could be somebody of the same sex. There was probably no one to talk to, so he's going to lean on the shoulder of a friend, and that friend happened to be a woman, and I think probably Camilla probably saved Charles's sanity. I think we should be grateful to her.
It all began to go wrong after the birth of Prince Harry. Perhaps she was like any young wife. She'd had a young family very quickly. They hadn't had time to get to know each other after their wedding before she became pregnant. It was too much. Diana was exposed to too much stress in too short a time. It was too much to cope with, being transformed from a nobody into a worldwide sensation overnight. And she got engaged, married, pregnant, all within 9 months. It was just too much for any woman.
There seemed no way out for Diana. Sucked into the myth and magic of the monarchy, the lie had to be maintained. Although the marriage was a sham, it must not appear that way to the outside world. Diana spent holidays alone with her children and her mother and sisters, and attended her son's school sports day. She extended her public role, she supported the family unit, and spoke on the subject of family values at a controversial conference in Brighton.
I doubt whether there is any standard formula for a successful family. The family is, after all, the most human, and hence the most imperfect, of institutions. Instead, I could only point to those mothers, fathers, and children in lonely isolation or in comfortable conformity who simply do their best with what they have.
Charles broke his arm playing polo, and Diana appeared publicly by his side when he left hospital.
How are you, sir?
But as soon as the press was out of sight, they parted, and Charles returned to his home at Highgrove and close to Camilla, his surrogate mother.
Well, a lot of people that know Charles quite well say that Camilla played that role. She played the role of sort of mother nanny. Prince Charles had a nanny every moment of the day who loved him very, very much. And some research proves that as long as you have one adult figure that is always there and loves you very much, it doesn't really matter if it's your mother, your father, or a nanny.
On an official visit to the Taj Mahal in India, Diana sat alone in front of the temple dedicated to eternal love. Charles came here before his marriage to Diana and sat in the same spot. He then vowed to return with his wife. In Egypt, Diana was again alone while Charles was on a private trip to Turkey. Diana, the royal ambassador at large was flying the flag for Britain. In Pakistan, she reached a new level of self-confidence.
She was beautiful. Now, with the best will in the world, the royal family are not beautiful. She was distinctly beautiful. She also brought great style. The royal family have never been renowned for being the best-dressed women in Britain, have they? They have other priorities. So she brought the glamour to the royal family that they'd lacked for a very long time. The Queen always commanded affection, but she was never perceived as gorgeous. And that's what Diana brought. She brought the glamour, the mystery of majesty, that elusive thing. She was the fairy tale princess.
In April 1992, Diana's beloved father died unexpectedly. A grieving Princess of Wales with other members of her family were joined by Charles in an emotional funeral service. A simple bouquet of lilies and sweet peas summed up Diana's grief over the loss of her beloved father. Within months, Andrew Morton's book appeared. The whole sham of the royal marriage was out in the open. The press had a field day as the revelations confirmed Diana's bulimia and her unhappy marriage to Charles. Camilla was exposed as Charles's mistress of many years, and Diana's own friend James Gilby and many others were credited as having spilled the beans to Andrew Morton. On top of this, bugged telephone conversations were leaked to the press. The strain was too much for Diana.
In all that you do, you reflect so very sincerely the philosophy of tender, loving care, which is and always will be the hallmark of this hospice.
At a hospice in Liverpool, the chairman's words reduced her to tears.
Her nerves were stretched to breaking point when she went up to Liverpool. I mean, remember she was bulimic, and it all just, I mean, her marriage had broken up, the Andrew Morton book had come out, everyone knew every detail of her private life. She was completely stressed out. I mean, I think we were very lucky that she didn't end up in a hospital, quite honestly. And I think, of course, when someone shows you a little bit of kindness and you're at breaking point, it's very, very normal to break down into tears.
Recovering her composure, Diana appeared with Charles at the Royal Garter ceremony. The public revelations about her marriage had left their mark, and Diana was suspected in royal circles of cooperating with Andrew Morton as an act of desperation.
I think Diana felt there was no other way to tell the world about her tragic personal life. She felt that only public exposure could end her private ordeal. And she was right, because it certainly achieved that aim, but perhaps the way she did it wasn't the wisest way. It was certainly damaging to her children, and it certainly made the royal family regard her as a traitor in their midst. And from that day on, I think her fate was sealed.
Before the revelations, plans had been made for Charles and Diana to make an official visit to Korea. Diana agreed with the Queen to accompany her estranged husband. The press hailed it as an opportunity for them to show some reconciliation. In the event, the body language said it all.
There was a hideous moment when we walked into the Prime Minister's residence, and the Prime Minister made a wonderful speech saying, "You are a beautiful couple and we are all delighted to welcome you." Well, it was just so obvious that those words were exactly the wrong thing to say. It was a classic textbook case of a warring couple. They didn't speak to each other once in our presence. They didn't even look at each other if they could avoid it. I mean, I can't remember seeing them look at each other.
Back in London, Diana and Charles attended the Royal Variety performance together. This was the last time they were seen in public before Prime Minister John Major made an announcement to the House of Commons.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children.
The strain of being thought to be living happily in a glorious land of tiaras and titles and happy endings was in fact too much to bear for Diana. She had fought for an independent life as a career princess and exposed the fairy tale as fiction.
I think had the two of them paid more attention to each other and taken more care of each other and the situation, I think Diana could have been a good wife for him. What I think happened and where it went so wrong was because she was so young, her head was turned by the stardom, and she had great difficulty in coping with that. He, meanwhile, had great difficulty in coping with a nose that was put very badly out of joint by having the limelight stolen from him.
Using the limelight, Diana made a speech about eating disorders.
I'm supposed to have my head down the loo for most of the day.
It was clear that she had completely recovered from her bulimia, free at last from her shameful friend.
I'm supposed to be dragged off in a minute with men in white coats, so if it's all right with you, I thought I might postpone my nervous breakdown to a more appropriate moment.
He was turned off physically by Diana, but he was also tired of somebody who made so many demands on him. He was a very selfish man who led a life where he did exactly as he pleased. When a wife and children came along, he wasn't willing to make the sacrifices, give them the attention that they deserved. And that rankled with Diana, and she was constantly reminding him of that.
It is a remarkable feat for a young woman to graduate from unqualified nursery teacher into a unique player on the world stage. She believed her husband had rejected her love. Refusing to suffer in silence, she broke with royal tradition and fought back. She tried but failed to modernize the monarchy.
She brought a magic that they lacked. There was no young, glamorous woman in their ranks when Diana came along. They desperately needed her, and they didn't know it at the time. The world took to her immediately, with her freshness, her naivety, her wonderful figure, long, lovely legs, blonde, good looks, blue eyes, and a willingness to enjoy all that part of the role. In fact, we wanted her so much that we willed Charles to marry her. And the rest, as they say, is history. He went along with it. We all thought she was so perfect. I think the stories at the time that we wrote said that she had all the qualities for a queen, and she did. She was just ideal for the role, but she wasn't ideal for Charles, and that was the tragedy.
Her marriage made her a beauty and a heroine. In a revolutionary move, she changed from victim to star. She is still the mother of the heir to the throne. Her influence over Prince William will take the monarchy into the next century. She'll continue to support her charitable causes and play an important role in the lives of ordinary people. Like many women of her time, she's discovered that her career has given her the confidence to act more decisively in her own private life.